Thank you very much, Paul. I am really proud of the National Union Teachers Association with the People's Assembly, and Christine Blower, that Paul just talked about, was absolutely instrumental. Has spoken at many People's Assembly AGMs and other public demonstrations and rallies. And I want to tell you something in what I'm going to say today about why I think it's important that teacher trades unions in particular, although all trades unions should, be interested in social justice and therefore interested in the People's Assembly. This is a session about the huge problems, the huge attacks that education in schools and colleges are under. But I think it should also be a session about the real possibility of developing a huge fight back, a huge social movement around the question of education. And I think Labour, with the events it's got on today, is showing how the door can be opened to building that social movement. And I think it could be a really important part of changing the face of this country, changing the relationship with this government. So I want to talk about 3 attacks on education that our young people are facing. I want to talk about the role of social justice in the fight for education, and then something about the way that I think the fight should develop from here. And the 3 attacks I want to talk about are about academisation and what I see as a huge threat to public service ethos education. I want to talk about the grammar schools thing, but I think others might, and I won't spend as long on it. And I want to talk about the very big problem of cuts in schools and colleges that are really damaging the education of our young people. So on the first of those, on the question of academisation, it can seem a bit abstract, where the problem is on academisation. And parents faced with an academisation battle at school, they might not think it matters that much. And I just want to tell you a couple of stories. There's an organisation called the Centre for High Performance, based at Oxford University, which studies how schools change themselves. And they published a report 6 months ago about how academy schools improve themselves. And they published this list of 8 things that these schools do to improve themselves. And the first one was change the head teacher. So do tell any head teachers you know that that's the first thing they think should happen. The second was change the advertising strategy for the school, which I tell you is not about education at all. And the 4th thing on their list was remove the poor quality students. That's their words, not mine. But remove the poor quality students. Now it turned into a big kerfuffle. They've taken this off the internet, and there was a big kerfuffle about whether they were advocating that you should remove the poor quality students or whether they were observing that that's what schools had done. But I tell you, that's a very big problem when you're looking at how academy schools work, because there are 2 ways of improving a school from the inside. There's improving teaching and learning, and that can be quite hard, and there's changing the kids you've got in your school, and that's quite easy. And you just pass the problem to somebody else. You say, we're not going to get the results from these kids, they've got special needs. We don't want them in our school because they won't get the GCSE results. Let's send them to somebody else's school instead. And that comes out, it's very baked in my belief, to the Academies programme. Because the Academies programme is all about making decisions further and further away from the public sphere and more in the private sphere. So we've driven local councillors out of running schools. They wanted to get rid of elected parent governors. Many academies don't have staff representatives on their governing body. So these sorts of public voices removed. And instead you've got an Academy Trust Chief Executive who makes mainly the decisions with an academic board that they essentially appoint themselves. And some of the decisions they make are to improve their pay. Many of them are paying themselves more than the Prime Minister. And to justify that, you need your school to look good. And the easiest way to make your school look good is to remove the children that you don't want to have in your school. And that is a huge threat to public service ethos education in this country. We have made great strides. Our movement has made great strides in going from primary education to universal secondary education, to fighting for girls' education, to fighting for the rights of black and ethnic minority kids in our schools, and we are in danger of being pushed back. So there's that one example that the Centre for High Performance says remove the poor quality students. There's another example. There's a chain of academies, and there are many examples like this. This one's in the northwest, where they are taking the children with special educational needs and they're busing them to another school in their chain. And I tell you, it's not because that school is better at teaching kids with special needs. It's because they want that one school, their centre of excellence, to look good on the league tables in order to justify their chief executive being paid all that money, to make their academy chain look good. So I'm saying to you that academisation isn't neutral. It's about a privatisation of our education service, and it leads to those sorts of questions being raised. It's not about public service ethos education where we want to educate every child, but it's looking for a way of improving some schools at the expense of others. And that brings me to the second big challenge, the grammar schools question. Now it's weird this, because the Tories are themselves at war about it. And like I said, I think other people will talk about it. So I'm just going to give you some basic statistics. In grammar schools in this country, less than 3% of the children have got free school meals, or in fact free school meals, whereas it's 18% in schools as a whole. So that tells you something about the ability of those schools to do anything about social mobility. Kids with free school meals are kept out of grammar schools. In fact, in grammar schools, there are 6 times more children who went to private prep schools in those grammar schools than there are children with free school meals. So people are buying advantage for their children, or they think they're buying advantage for their children. But the weird thing is, it isn't even that much of an advantage, because the kids that they call bright kids, they do as well in good comprehensives as they do in grammar schools. But what happens is the other children lose out tremendously, and we have to win this argument with the public that every time you make one school a grammar school, you're making the 3 or 4 other schools around it into secondary modern schools. Every time you select one child, you are rejecting 3 or 4 other children. And that's the real problem we've got with this grammar school arrangement. And if you know people from the generation that I was in, where some of us went to grammar schools and some of us went to secondary moderns, you know that the adults who went to secondary modern schools describe themselves as having failed, that they failed the 11 plus. And many children take that right through into adulthood with them. And it's absolutely disgraceful that we should do that to children anywhere. So there's a big problem if the Tories manage to get away with that. We're already seeing selection in the ways I talked about in academy schools. We're seeing it directly if they get away with bringing back grammar schools on an even wider basis than they've got them now. And then at the same time as that's going on, there is a huge problem of cuts in our schools. The Institute for Fiscal Studies says that schools are now facing the biggest real terms decline in funding since the 1970s. It's at least an 8% cut across the length of this Parliament. Probably, we think in the NUT, it'll be 10% or higher, because there are some hidden funding pressures in schools. And what that means, what's a number? 8% cut, who cares about that? But what it means is class sizes going up, class sizes 36, 38. We heard of a class size in maths in a secondary school this week of 48. There are class sizes going up. There are children losing opportunities because of that. We are seeing all across the country arts, dance, drama, music, PE being lost from the curriculum, because there's something called the EBAC, which is making those subjects second class, and as soon as you've got funding cuts alongside that, the schools cut those subjects. So we are seeing children denied life opportunities, because for some children, being able to do music is the thing that keeps them coming to school. They're being successful at that, or at PE, or at arts and drama. It's the thing that gets them there, so it keeps them in school for all the other subjects. Not only that, it's the thing that they live for. And we are depriving them of that life opportunity by those cuts happening. And at the same time, as class sizes going up in that way that I'm describing because of these budget cuts, these subjects being lost, and then we're seeing, in particular at the moment, teaching assistants attacked. You might have seen that the huge fights that are developing in Derby and Durham about attacks on the terms and conditions of the TAs that work there. In lots of other places, we're seeing TAs sacked. We're seeing them certainly not replaced when they leave the school. And that often is a direct attack on children with special educational needs, because often those TAs are working directly with children with special educational needs. And so we're seeing increased class size, less individual attention for children, the loss of those subject opportunities. I should just say, on the question of special educational needs, something I forgot to say. On the grammar school paper that Theresa May brought forward, it's a green paper, so it's a discussion paper, but she titled it Schools That Work for Everyone, which is their big lie. But you know, in the whole document, it's a big document, there is not one single word about children with special needs or disabilities. Schools that work for everyone, with absolutely no mention whatsoever of any child with special needs, because we know that they will lose out tremendously in grammar schools. So those are three of the big threats, and I can talk for a long time about other threats to education, but I tell you, academisation, grammar schools whose funding cuts, they're big threats, and it's possible to mobilise around them and to build a significant movement. I think it's really important. I said I wanted to say something about why I think it's right that the NUT should be involved with the People's Assembly. And it's because the kids that we teach face all sorts of challenges. But there's a sort of ideological reason as well. Because there is a big gap in the argument if all we say is comprehensive schools are good and grammar schools are bad. Because I tell you, even in our comprehensive schools, when they are working well, working class kids, black and ethnic minority kids, kids with special needs and disability don't do well enough in our schools. There is a big gap in achievement between working class kids and middle class kids. Now, it's a dangerous thing for a teachers' union leader to say that. It sounds like I'm attacking schools, and I'm not in the slightest attacking schools, because this is a product of the inequality that our children face. So my partner's here today. She teaches taught in a primary school in Hackney, and teachers there used to go and visit families before the kids start in reception, and teachers do this across the country. And you will go and you will find a family where the mother is doing 2 or 3 jobs, where the parents are doing 2 or 3 jobs because they are so low paid. They are doing that work to try and keep the family with bread on the table. And that means that they're not there to read to their child at night through no fault of their own, where these children are living in a room that is the living room, and that's their bedroom as well, where there's no bedroom separate from the TV, there's nowhere to do homework, where children have no books at home, where they come to school hungry. And I tell you, when you have that sort of poverty and the other inequalities that you face, then you do get inequalities of school outcomes. And so it's an inevitable consequence that the fight for real equality in educational outcomes also requires the fight for equality for the children coming into our schools. People don't always see it that way. Sometimes people think you must be able to just solve this in the school. And I just want to give you one parallel. If you think about the difference in life expectancy between people who live in Glasgow and people who live in Kensington and Chelsea, it's 10 or more years. And nobody says in that circumstance, the reason people don't live as long in Glasgow is because the nurses or the doctors in Glasgow aren't as good as the nurses and doctors in Kensington and Chelsea. People know it's inequality in every part of those people's lives that leads to that situation. And the fundamental reason for the inequality in school outcomes is the inequality that children face going in. So I think that teachers are under a moral obligation. We're under a moral obligation to do everything we can in school, being the best teachers that we can, working as hard as you reasonably can, doing everything you can for the kids in school. But we're also under a moral obligation to do everything we can for those children outside school. And that means being part of the People's Assembly. It means being part of the fight for more equality in our society so those children don't face those disadvantages when they come in to our schools in the first place. And that brings me on to what I want to say about the fight back. Now, I think it was really uplifting that Jeremy Corbyn, in his victory speech, decided to make a point of saying that they were going to do something on the streets about education. So there have been, the NUT, we didn't know about Jeremy's speech until just before he said it, but we put on 70 or 80 stalls today, and we think Labour have done 3 or 4 times that number of stalls around the question of grammar schools and selection, and on our stalls also around the question of education funding cuts. I think it's really important that a major political party, we're not affiliated to Labour, so I would welcome the Lib Dems, the Greens doing stuff on this area as well, but I think it's really important that a major political party with a lot of members has decided to do something on the streets about this question. And I think it offers an opportunity to have a dialogue with hundreds of thousands of parents about what's going on in our schools. I want to say to Labour, and I say this to every Labour politician I talk to, we were at the Labour conference last week, you shouldn't stop with the question of grammar schools and selection. We should be also talking to people on the streets about the funding cuts. Because Labour has a place to stand on this question. It's got education, education, education. Whatever you think about the person who said that, education, education, education. The work around Sure Start, the work around reducing class sizes in the early years, the work around putting more money into education is an important thing for Labour to say it's got a bit of a track record on, and to say that Labour going forward is going to be fighting for education to be a top priority again in our country, to have the best education for all kids, to have high quality vocational education as well as academic education, but really high quality education to be provided, to put more resources into early years, but also Labour can say that they will do something about the poverty that children face. So the NUT wants to work with all people of goodwill, Labour, the People's Assembly, to make education absolutely the focus of a big social movement. And I think we can do it. We had a strike on July the 5th, a national strike of our organisation. Unfortunately, we didn't get any other unions to strike with us on that day, but we had a successful day of strike action, we thought, in terms of putting the question of education funding at the forefront of political debate. And we want it to carry on being at the forefront of political debate. So in the next fortnight, we're going to launch a website which is going to reveal the cuts at every individual school across the next few years. So you can put in your nearby school or your postcode and see all the schools around you. You can see the level of cuts, and we're going to turn that level of cuts into saying this would mean X teachers or Y teaching assistants would lose their jobs. We're making that sort of equivalence. And we want you to help us make that website go viral. We want to have meetings of parents around the country talking about the cuts in their schools and saying this is wrong, this shouldn't happen. We want to see demonstrations outside town halls, not against the town hall, but a rally for the local schools at the steps of the town hall, demanding the money from government to put the situation right in those schools. And at the same time, in that context, talking to people about the grammar schools question, but doing it as well as about selection, doing it about the real problems that people know that our schools face at the moment. And I think in that context, then the NUT can then think about how we can use more of our muscle to make that work in all the ways that unions have available to them. So this is what I want to say to you, and it's what I want to say to Labour. Making education the centre of the anti-austerity fight. It's not the only centre. We have to fight around the NHS, we have to fight around all the cuts that people are facing. But making education, when parents, this is what I like to say, there is not a single parent in this country, no matter which party they voted for in the general election, or which side they voted for in the referendum, there is not a single parent who voted for their child's class size to go up. And there is not a single parent who voted for their arts, dance, drama teacher to be sacked. And there is not a single parent who said, please sack my TA so that my child doesn't have that support. And I think we can win parents to an understanding that austerity is bad because it's bad for schools and therefore it's bad more generally. So please do everything you can. When we launch that website, when Labour goes back to the streets in November and we're going back, and when we're calling some major demonstrations in London, in Birmingham, in Manchester in the next few weeks over education cuts, please do everything you can to support us in taking those fights to the Tories.